Welcome back, folks, to my WrestleRant video series where I give my in-depth analysis of all the pay-per-views that I watch on the WWE Network. Today I'll be talking about the 2001 installment of Survivor Series, where the entire theme of the show was WWF versus the Alliance, WCW, and ECW. Easily one of the most botched storylines in WWE history, and thankfully this pay-per-view marked the culmination of that angle. But kicking off the show was Christian versus Al Snow, representing the WWF. Christian represented the Alliance. He was the European champion, which was the title that was on the line here. Good matchup for the most part. Christian was just kind of breaking off on his own after breaking up with Edge after the whole King of the Ring thing. So he was kind of breaking off on his own, was showing a lot of potential as a singles competitor. Al Snow, I don't think at this point in time, like when I said in my 1998 review of Survivor Series, he was still doing the whole head gimmick. At this point in time, I'm pretty sure it was done by that point, and he was only here to represent WWF, and he was a part of the Tough Enough cast, and he was a judge there. So I think by this point in time, that gimmick was, had come and gone, but still a good matchup to kick off the show nevertheless. Always enjoy the European Championship, and I'm kind of hoping that Rusev brings it back at some point, given the fact he's European, but which would be really, really cool. But anyway, though, good matchup to kick off the show, kind of uninspiring and forgettable, but it was what it was. Up next, William Regal representing the Alliance, taking on the WWF's Tajiri, and these two, I think, would go on to later become World Tag Team Champions. If they weren't World Tag Team Champions before this, and I don't think they were, I think it was afterwards that they teamed together and became tag champs. But this matchup went all of 3 minutes. It was fine for what it was. Tajiri's a great competitor. He was always over with the audience. William Regal was a great in-ring competitor as well. Former commissioner of the WWF. Although both guys are great workers in their own right together, it's not even that they have bad chemistry. There's just really not much you can do in 3 minutes. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to say like a 3-minute warning thing. I'm not trying to tie into that at all. But, I mean, there's really not much for these guys to do in a 3-minute matchup, and it was just kind of pointless for the most part. Torrie Wilson was in Tajiri's corner, and that was pretty much the only notable part of this matchup. I mean, it was fine for what it was, but it was over within 3 minutes and pretty forgettable at best. So up next, we had the WCW United States Champion Edge taking on the Intercontinental Champion Test, representing the Alliance in a Intercontinental versus United States Champion versus Champion unification matchup to merge both belts. And let's not mistake the WCW United States belt for the WWE United States belt, which would come into play about 2 years later. So even though they share the same lineage, they're not the exact same title. That wasn't the Star-Spangled title that we have nowadays. So just let me throw that out there for those that were unaware. But for what this was, though, this was a pretty good matchup. Test, I don't want to say that he was always extremely underrated, because every single pay-per-view that I watched him in, he hasn't been great. I mean, he was a high flyer for a guy of his size, for a guy of his stature, of a large stature. He could really go. But he wasn't the best in-ring wrestler. Some of his matches were pretty clunky from what I've seen anyway. He's a good worker, don't get me wrong. I just don't think he could have been like a world champion. And someone asked me that in a recent #AskESM video. But I just don't think he could have ever become a world champion had he, stayed around in the company past his death I think it was in 2009. But anyway, though, this was a good match for what it was. Edge was always a great worker, bringing Test to a pretty passable matchup. Put the two together. Edge had that speed and agility. Test had that. He was very agile as well. Like I said before, for a big guy, he could really fly. So these guys put together a pretty good matchup that made the unification of these two titles mean something. Edge came out victorious as the unified United States and Intercontinental Champion, and now we only have one Intercontinental Championship belt. The U.S. title will be put away for another 2 more years, like I said before it became exclusive property of SmackDown in 2003 as its mid-card title. And now, thinking back on it now, this is something that we should see now. I mean, there's really no point to have 2 mid-card champions when we only have 1 set of tag titles, 1 Divas title, 1 world title. Why do we have 2 mid-card titles? I mean, Rusev is slowly but surely making that belt mean something again. But the Intercontinental Champion, I mean, even Dolph Ziggler's been making his belt mean something again. But for the most part, those belts haven't mean shit in years. So why even bother having them? It really just makes no sense to me. So hopefully we see something similar to this in the near future, regardless of whether it be between Ziggler and Rusev or whoever's holding the championships at that point in time. But it was smart for them to save these unification title matches, not to do them at the Invasion pay-per-view or whatever. They did it at one of their big 4 pay-per-views at Survivor Series. And this is where this whole angle culminated, like I said before. And it couldn't have been better timing, because at least Survivor Series meant something. It wasn't a random show. Granted, they would save the big title unification match between the WCW World Champion and the WWF Champion, the whole tournament with those guys, with Angle, Rock, Stone Cold, and Jericho, until Vengeance, the following month. but they kind of had to do it at that pay-per-view because they had the big 5-on-5 match here, so I understand that point of it, that aspect of it. But even so, though, it was smart of them to do the unification title matches on this show. So speaking of unification title matches, we had representing the Alliance, the WCW Tag Team Champions, the Dudley Boys, taking on the WWF Tag Team Champions, the Hardys, in a steel cage match to unify both sets of tag team titles. And of course, as expected, an amazing matchup. This was around the time that the Dudley Boys, the Hardys, and of course Edge and Christian, I mean, at this point in time, they were already broken up. But from 99, 2000, 2001, these three teams were ripping it up every single fucking month. And it wasn't even like the Usos versus Golden Stardust where you get sick of watching them after a month or two. These guys had like a 3-year-long feud where they're having great matches every single time they came together. And this was no exception. The crowd is very hot for this matchup. And of course, a moment for the highlight reel, which you can still see today when WWE shows clips of Survivor Series, Jeff Hardy taking a leap off the cage, I believe doing a swanton bomb maneuver right off the top of the cage. And of course, despite that, the Dudley Boys would come out victorious as the unified WCW and WWF Tag Team Champions, and the Dudley Boys would be a mainstay in the tag team division for many years to come. There was also a backstage segment on the show too, where they teased tension between the Hardy Boys, and I think they would go on to face each other in a singles match the following month of Vengeance, if I remember correctly, with Lita as a special guest referee, not to be mistaken with their 2009 rivalry 8 years later, which is mind-boggling to say that it was 8 years that these guys were on and off tag team. But anyway, great matchup between the Dudleys and Hardy Boys on this show. Up next, we had an immunity battle royal. What the rules of this matchup was, I have no idea. I just know that it combined the WWF guys with the WCW guys, and that was really all I know. I don't know if the immunity part meant that that they could keep their job if the other one got fired. I'm not exactly sure. Maybe that's what immunity meant. I'm not exactly sure. But battle royals, to me, are really usually hit or miss. They're either really, really good with a lot of great suspense down the stretch, or they can be completely throwaway until the final two people. And this was one of those matches. Even when it came down to Test and Billy Gunn, I just didn't care. Test, after losing Edge a couple of matches earlier in the night, came back in this match and won it. So that was a nice little swerve. And even though I'm not the biggest Test fan, I loved his entrance music, so I was very happy to hear it multiple times in one night. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, Test coming out victorious in this one to represent the Alliance. Up next, we had a six-pack challenge for the WWF Women's Championship, pitting Trish Stratus representing the Alliance, Trish Stratus representing WWF, Lita representing WWF, Jacqueline representing WWF, and representing the Alliance was Mighty Molly, Jazz, and Ivory. So for a 5-minute matchup, it was decent, but six-pack challenges, again, like Battle Royals, can either be really hit or miss. Like, I love the six-pack challenge in Night of Champions 2010, but then again, that was like that was elimination style. Like the one in 07 at Vengeance, that was not elimination style. That match was over in like 10 minutes. Like that really bothered me when I watched that back on the WWE Network. And I mean, this was kind of when Trish Stratus kind of got her ball rolling a little bit after the whole partnership with Mr. McMahon came to an end. She kind of broke out on her own as a breakout star in the women's division, kind of carrying that division for the next 5 to 6 years as a women's champion. So it only made sense for her to come out victorious here, but not the best in-ring work. There were some spots, some shining spots from some of the women in here, like Trish, like I said before, Lita, and a few of the other girls, but for the most part, it was just kind of a mess. Just throwing 6 women into the ring and expecting something to come out of it. Not a good match. And then we get to the main event, Team WWF, The Rock, Chris Jericho, The Undertaker, Kane, and Big Show taking on the Alliance, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Rob Van Dam, Kurt Angle, Booker T, and Shane McMahon for ownership of the company. One of the biggest Survivor Series matches in the history of that event, considering what was on the line, what was up for stake, what was at stake here. And of course, a lot of drama going into the matchup, a lot of tension pitting Team WWF against the Alliance, and that someone from the Alliance was rumored to be jumping ship to WWF, and it was a lot of speculation that it would be Stone Cold Steve Austin. It would actually end up being Kurt Angle, and a nice swerve for the century. And I think Kurt Angle would stay heel, even though Stone Cold went face and Kurt Angle went heel. And I'm not exactly sure. The whole thing with the Attitude Era, like there's a lot of things that didn't make sense in the Attitude Era, I'll say that much. And this is technically not a part of the Attitude Era. The Attitude Era kind of died after WrestleMania 17, and going into the Alliance, a lot of people don't really count that as part of the Attitude Era. But just to have Kurt Angle join and then turn on them, and Stone Cold to make amends with Vince after this. It just didn't make any sense to me. But it still made for a very hot moment that people pop for in the crowd. Of course, Team WWF coming out victorious. I mean, why wouldn't they? They wouldn't make themselves look inferior to a company that they just bought out. So, a good matchup, though. Some of the early eliminations, like, I didn't really care for. A lot of them were just like over in a second. But it was a good match, and, you know, going down the stretch with The Rock and Jericho getting a real big push in this match, which is not really a surprise in retrospect, considering the fact he'd be pegged to become the first ever undisputed champion about a month later at Vengeance. So for him to be one of the final few guys and to tease tension with The Rock and keep his heel persona made sense from a storyline standpoint. And of course, when it came down to, and Shane was like one of the first people eliminated, which was kind of I mean, it makes sense because he was like obviously the worst of all of them, even though he's so freaking entertaining in the ring. It's still, though, I mean, he was like the captain of the team, and yet he was like the first one eliminated, so it didn't really make much sense. And I don't think we saw him after that either. But when it came down to Stone Cold and The Rock kind of really helping build, I mean, this was like an 0-1, so this was after the whole match at WrestleMania 17 earlier on in the year. But even still, though, another great chapter in the long rivalry between Stone Cold and Steve Austin and The Rock, but in the WWE. But a great way to close off the night with Team WWF emerging victorious. Kurt Angle celebrating with his the team that he turned on, or the team that he had now just joined, Team WWF. Vince comes out on the stage, the iconic image of him on the stage, you know, just celebrating, we won. The ownership of the company is ours. Paul Heyman, I think, was great. Paul Heyman and Jim Ross, I think, are a very underrated duo on commentary. I thought they had a lot of greatness together at WrestleMania 17 and throughout most of 01 with that being said. And I thought they had a lot of great chemistry on the show with Heyman saying, you're going to be the first one I fire once we win. And Paul Heyman, you know, the facial reaction just like once the Alliance lost, I thought was amazing. So a lot of great stuff there. But yeah, aside from the main event, there's not a lot of note from this show. I mean, like I said before, the whole invasion angle was one big botch. And there was a lot of good stuff on this show. It was just, I mean, for the better, though. I mean, it was probably for the better in that it culminated the storyline. People can move on to bigger and better things. By this point, the invasion storyline had really died a death, and people just wanted to see it end. But if there's anything from this show that you want to go back and watch, I wouldn't recommend. I wouldn't go up against, or what am I trying to say here? I wouldn't recommend that you don't watch this pay-per-view in full. If you want to watch the pay-per-view in full, I think you'll enjoy it. I think there's a lot of good matches on the show that you'll really, really enjoy. But if you're the kind of person that only wants to watch one or two matches from a pay-per-view, the best matches from the show to watch are easily the tag team match, Steel Cage, and the main event. Everything else was good to just forgettable. A quick recap here. Christian Al Snow, meh. William Regal and Tajiri, meh. Edge and Test was a good matchup. Nothing you'll remember all that, you know, too far from now. And tag team championship match I thought was excellent as well. Test versus the Battle Royale I thought was forgettable. The Divas match, not good. And the main event I thought was entertaining down the stretch. Like early on, people just didn't care. Like for the eliminations of the Big Show and Shane and all these other guys, they just didn't give two shits. But down the stretch I thought it was really, really good though. So I'm not going to say it's a mistake if you watch this pay-per-view in full, but if you really like the invasion, maybe you do want to watch it in full. But there was some newsworthy moments, of course, with Team WWF taking control and ownership of the company in the two unification matches. So it was a newsworthy pay-per-view. It just wasn't all that great because a lot of the in-ring action was not all that good. And the whole invasion angle that just kind of just drenched down this pay-per-view because it was not a good angle, whatsoever. I think it was easily one of the most botched storylines in WWE history, like I said earlier. But yeah, like I said before, go to your way to watch the tag team matchup for some classic tag team wrestling, as well as the main event, Team WWF versus Team Alliance. So, with all that being said, I thank you guys for watching. I'll be back in my next video to review the 2002 installment of Survivor Series. Easily the best installment that I've watched yet, which is saying a lot considering the early ones were good, but this one I thought was amazing. So get my full thoughts on that in my next video. I'm Graham Jason Matthews, and I'll catch you guys then.